talk about what's going on in Russia and indeed in Ukraine. We saw overnight, Tuesday, Wednesday night, that drone attack on the Kremlin. The footage that we've been playing you involving one drone hitting one of the spires of the Kremlin's spires, and then another drone apparently being shot down. Well, the Kremlin has said this was a terrorist attack. They have accused Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, of attempting to assault Russia and to assassinate President Putin. In response to that, visiting Helsinki yesterday, President Zelensky denied any responsibility and said, "We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our own territory." Well, let's talk about this with journalist and author John Sweeney. He is live for us now from central Ukraine. He's also author of the book Killer in the Kremlin. Good morning to you, John.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, no one knows yet where the provenance came from for these two drones attack on the Kremlin. A lot of question marks about, would it likely be Ukrainians or Ukrainian sympathists, or would it more likely to be a false flag alert by the Russians, great propaganda to make this claim? But either way, it doesn't look like it was an attack, whoever mounted it, even if it was genuine, that would be likely to assassinate Vladimir Putin, one of the most protected men in the entire world. What do you make of it all?
Well, it's kind of weird. It's completely weird. There are three, there could be four possibilities. The first is it's the Russians. The second, it's the Ukrainians. The third is it's some kind of third party. The fourth, it's space aliens. I don't think it's space aliens. But the Russians, let's look at it. It's embarrassing. A year ago, Vladimir Putin launches a war, which the plan is for it last 3 days. More than a year later, the Kremlin put out a press release saying, hey, Vladimir Putin's okay because he wasn't there. He was somewhere else in his dasher in the countryside. That's embarrassing. So the argument against it being the Russians is that it doesn't look good. Number two, the Ukrainians. Now, Zelensky's denied it, but if you're being skeptical, you would say, of course he would deny it.
Indeed.
However, my take on this is the Ukrainians are fully aware that their armourer and their treasurer, as the West, especially America, and Europe and Britain, and they are worried about over-worrying people in the West, in particular people who are worried about the possibility of nuclear conflict. And the Ukrainian story is they're defending their homes. For them to have done this goes against that grand and simple and good strategy.
Yeah.
And I think the Ukrainian government is smart, not stupid. So therefore, when Zelensky says we didn't do this, I'm inclined to believe him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. In all these cases, again, we know that, the first casualty of war is the truth. And we know that, certainly Russian propaganda has been extraordinary over the years, some ridiculously laughable claims. But we also know that the Zelensky's war machine operates a superb media game, superb propaganda as well. Although we do have, independent journalists who can often verify a lot of it's being true. But we need to accept that there's propaganda on both sides. But as you say, it simply isn't in the interests of Ukraine for anyone to think that they had done this. And that would be immediately accusation that would be made by the Kremlin. Of course they would. However, as with these cases, say with the attack on the Nord Stream gas pipeline, it may well be organisations who behind these things who perhaps think that they're acting in the interests of Ukraine or Russia, but actually are not officially sanctioned. Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility, but I was just thinking about the picture. And also, the location, right? I can't remember how many times I've been detained by police officers simply for trying to film in Red Square. Yeah. And remember, when I was working for the BBC, I had all the correct paperwork and so forth. So you get a camera out in Red Square, you get detained very, very quickly indeed. And if you actually look at the drone as it comes in, and I was just looking at it on your pictures just then, you can see there's an explosion. But it's not, the drone actually hits the flag. Anyway, there's a great big bang. And you almost wonder as if the bang, somebody has left a bomb on the roof, hit it, and it just so happens when the drone goes by, It's odd.
It is odd. I mean, it looks like one is shot down. There's also, you can see clearly on the footage of two people running up steps on that dome before the second one. But again, it's all. But then there would be people. There would be armed guards up there. One would assume. But there's a lot of question marks about some of this is security camera footage. Some, of course, there will be cameras that are trained on the Kremlin. It's a remarkable building, and yet, it all looks rather strange. Shall we leave it at that at least?
Okay, so there's one thing. So when Boris Nemtsov was assassinated in 2015, 100 yards from the Kremlin, none of the CCTV worked.
Yeah, such bad luck, wasn't it, that none of it was working that night?
This makes me think that even though it's embarrassing, this, I suspect, is a black flag operation by the Russian secret police to make Ukraine look bad, so they've got a justification for doing something.
But again, not just a justification for them. Again, we've seen overnight more attacks, drone attacks on Ukraine, and indeed including the capital, Kyiv. But also, crucially, we've got that Victory Day parade coming up next Tuesday. Second Victory Day parade for Vladimir Putin without anything resembling a victory. But also, I was wondering if this is about, making people in the West, maybe the governments aren't going to believe it, the military aren't going to believe it, but general public, many looking online would say, oh, this is crazy, Ukraine upgrading this war. And again, basically putting doubt in the minds of Western voters, saying to their governments, look, we don't want this to upgrade, stop arming and aiding Ukraine in this fight against Russia because, as you say, we're worried about it escalating. Could there be, a cleverness in it there, or is it just just an excuse he just wants for these Russian people, yet another excuse for bombing the hell out of civilians in Ukraine?
I think the primary audience are the Russian people. And I think that the Kremlin is getting irritated that although Russia passively goes along with this war, shame on them, there is no real sense in Russia of we've got to win this war and we're determined to do that, as there is here. You talk to ordinary people here and they absolutely want a Ukrainian victory. That is not the kind of vibe that the tiny number of reporters who are left in Russia are picking up. So I think this is a black operation directed at the Russian people to say, look, how dare the Ukrainians do this? We've got to hit them. We've got to hit them hard. And you've got to go out there and fight. Because I think at one level the Russian people are going along with it, but they're not fighting like Britain fought in 1940 or the Ukrainians are fighting now. Nothing like it.
But it's not for them. It's not, as it is for Ukraine, an existential battle for survival, is it? No, you've been there for a long time. You're in a town of Khmelnytsky in central Ukraine. In terms of how things are going right now, we've been talking again and again about this upcoming spring offensive from the Russians and a counteroffensive from the Ukrainians. We understand the Ukrainians, so they're still waiting. Their soldiers are being trained in places like Britain and Poland and elsewhere. They're still waiting for a lot of the weaponry that's been promised to turn up. Still negotiating for those jets. Still hoping to get those. What is delaying the long talked about Russian offensive in the spring?
Well, I think they've had it, Julia. They've had it, and they've thrown everybody into Bakhmut.
Was it on a Friday and I wasn't at work?
It's not. So there are three problems with the Russian army. The first is that it lacks spirit because the Ukrainians are defending their homes, and the Russian logic for war is that Ukraine is Nazi and the president is Jewish. It's absurd. So Russian army spirit is weak. Number two, their logistics are feeble because the Russian state, from Putin down, is monstrously corrupt. And number three, the leadership is bad. The people are promoted because of their loyalty towards Putin rather than their effectiveness. And there is a lack of honesty in the entire military system. If you say in Putin's Russia, that's not going to work, that's wrong, you can die.
Yeah, so he surrounds himself with yes men, and then and then we see what happens when you don't have a 3-day victory. John Sweeney, we'll have to leave it there. You keep safe. That's the number one thing. Journalist and author of Killer in the Kremlin. They're live for us from Ukraine.